How effective is Rainn Wilson's new book, Soul Boom, at convincing us that we need a spiritual revolution to solve our problems today? Well, let me tell you what I thought. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. All right, I just finished Soul Boom by Rainn Wilson, better known by probably most people as Dwight Schrute from the comedy The Office, although he's generally a successful actor. He's done a handful of other things too. But he just put out this new book, Soul Boom, about spirituality, religion, why it's important to talk about these things in our culture today. So let me tell you, it obviously resonates a lot with the stuff I talk about on this channel in general, but let me tell you what I thought about it in my typical format with the main idea of the book, the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then my reaction to it in general. So the main idea of this book is captured really well by that subtitle, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. It's Rainn Wilson's case for talking about spiritual matters, is kind of what it boils down to. It's his case that we need to discuss non-material aspects of human experience. We need to discuss things like love and forgiveness and purpose and these non-material spiritual matters that needs to be part of our conversation in terms of anything that's going to get us out of a lot of the entrenched issues of our time, whether that's social issues, political issues, justice and inequities. The climate is something he talks about, meaning climate change and the weather and all of that stuff. All of these things, he argues, there's a spirituality behind all of this stuff that we need to be discussing and talking about. So that touches issues like, what do we do about the concept of God, and how do we talk about God? What about religion per se? What are kind of the pillars of religious thought? What are the pillars of kind of the path of wisdom in the ancient traditions? All of that stuff is kind of part of this, and ultimately he's trying to argue that we need a spiritual revolution that is going to, if we have any sort of hope of getting out of a lot of the things that plague modern society. That's kind of what Soul Boom really is about. Now, the research behind it is, one thing I was really impressed about with the research was the, I don't know, ecumenical, I don't know if this is quite the right word for it, but there's a broad-mindedness to his understanding of the great faith traditions and great religious traditions globally and historically. He is a member of the Baha'i faith, so if you know I don't know a lot about Baha'ism per se, but what I do know about it is borne out by the way he writes and speaks in this book, which is that Baha'i seems to be very cognizant of kind of all of the historic great faith traditions in human history. And so he brings in wisdom from Christianity, from Buddhism, from Judaism, from Islam. He kind of touches Hinduism. He talks a little bit about that. He really is broad-minded in terms of his understanding of kind of the broad scope of human spiritual faith traditions. And I will say I was impressed at the depth to which he seems to have engaged in these issues. He quotes from a wide variety of sources, and quotes from primary historic or primary holy texts, primary sacred texts, pretty widely. There's actually a pretty funny section early in the book where he talks about there's a little quiz where he says, is this a quote from the TV series Kung Fu, or is it a quote from a religious text? And you have to kind of identify what's what. But that just goes to show that he's pretty well versed, I would say, in these holy texts. So I was generally impressed with that tone, or the breadth of that research and his fluency in some of these ancient traditions. And that's a lot of what he pulls on in the book. Now, the readability of it is it's enjoyable, very enjoyable from the perspective of him being a comedic and enjoyable person. He seems to have an enjoyable personality that shines forth through these pages, and it is pretty funny. It's not like gut bustingly laugh out loud funny, but there are lots of parts that made me smile, lots of parts that made me chuckle. He goes on funny tangents and rants, and then circles back around to the main idea of what he's talking about, and he does it in a very wink and nod, self-aware kind of way. And he seems to be a very likable, relatable person, and that comes out pretty strongly. So the readability is very high. It's also not very long. It's not written to be inscrutable. It's not written to be deeply academic or anything like that. It's written to be approachable and enjoyable, and it's also written, importantly, to be inspiring. And so there's kind of a call to action tone throughout the book. And there are parts of it that were inspiring, for genuinely so. And so I found all of that kind of pulled it together to make it a very readable book, very readable experience. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about my reaction, spend a few minutes on my reaction to this book. I have some things I really liked and appreciate about this book, and I have a few pieces of question or critique to offer about it, and I want to unpack that just in a few minutes. So I'm coming at this as a Christian pastor, right? So I'm coming at this as someone who is, on one sense, deeply primed to resonate with the idea of a cultural influencer, someone who's successful in Hollywood. Like the idea that someone who's successful in Hollywood would unabashedly and confidently want to talk about matters of spirituality. I think on the one hand, I'm like, absolutely fist pump, yes, let's have that conversation. And I love that aspect of this book. I love that he's doing it unapologetically. I love that it's bold. I love that it's confident. And I do love the fundamental kind of pillar of the book that is we need to talk about spiritual matters. Like we can't pretend that we can just... There's kind of a sense of, this is me paraphrasing a lot, but there's a sense in the book where it's like we can't pretend that we can just keep tweaking systems and policies and material issues. We can't pretend that we can just do that and that's going to solve all of our issues. We need to, like, as humans, talk about the spiritual side of being human. Love, forgiveness, purpose, hope, faith, all of that stuff. So on the one hand, I love that is an explicit part of this argument. I think that it's great that someone like Rainn Wilson is like really trying to trumpet that in the sphere that he's in. And so I was primed to, that's part of the reason I picked up the book, because I was really interested. I'm interested to see how he would engage that conversation. And I think he does it, like I said earlier in the research part, he does it in a very broad-minded way. I really liked his like way of kind of pointing out, here's how a lot of these great wisdom faith traditions resonate with a lot of the same concerns, like care for the neighbor, care for the marginalized, self-giving love towards the other. That stuff resonates with a lot of ancient faith traditions, and the way that he pulls on it and the way that he puts them in conversation with each other with his humor and his kind of vulnerable personal style. He talks about his personal spiritual journey too. The way he does all that is it's touching, it's encouraging, it's inspiring at points, and it does thoughtfully engage with this broad swath of kind of human tradition and human religion. I liked all of that. I genuinely did. I appreciated a lot of it. So let me offer. So those are the things I liked. The things I liked about it. Let me offer a few thoughts by way of, I don't know if critique is the right word, but let's say critique or question. Kind of this is the reaction section of the review. So here's part of my reaction as I walked away from this book. Given all the positive things I just said, there was one part of it that left me a little scratching my head. And I think this is it. This whole book could be put under an umbrella of, honestly, a pretty optimistic view of humanity and human future and human, the ability for humans to kind of realize our own flourishing. This whole book is in a fundamental way, it's actually quite optimistic, in the sense that, I want to try to say this very carefully, in the sense that Rainn Wilson seems to believe we really could do it. Like we really could realize this spiritual revolution he's putting out there if we follow these principles, the principles, the pillars of the spiritual revolution that he puts forward later in the book. And on some level, he does have a chapter, near the end of the book, there's a chapter called This Broken Blue Marble, or it's something like that. I'd have to look at it again. But he does have a chapter where he talks about the very real kind of messed up stuff that's in the world, the broken things, the concerning things, the violence, the climate change, and all of that stuff. So it's not as though he's just naive and not looking at what's wrong in the world, but I think underneath that, what I mean by optimistic is to say that he thinks we really can overcome it. Through these spiritual practices and spiritual resources and spiritual means. And while I really appreciate the focus on the matter of spirit and heart and non-material matters, I love that, and I can like totally come alongside him in that like kind of rallying cry. At the end of the day, I don't know if I agree with his fundamental optimism there. And I want to say a little bit more about what I mean by that. I tend to be a person, and I would say I am in line with a certain stream of Christian historic Orthodox Christian thinking on this. I, on the one hand, hold a very high view of what humans are capable of, in the sense of humans are capable of a lot of profound matters of beauty. Humans are capable of profound forgiveness and healing and activism. Humans have innate dignity, which I would link to my own theological concept of the image of God, the Imago Dei. I think that humans have profound capacity by virtue of being human and by virtue of bearing God's image and being able to do a lot. So I have a high view of humans in that sense, a high-ish anthropology in that sense, but I have, on the other hand, a very low anthropology, to use the title of David Zoll's book, great book, by the way, Low Anthropology. I have a low view of humans' ability to withstand greed, the corrupting influences of power and authority in the world. I have a very low view of, I mean, basically these things kind of cooperate off of each other in almost a dialectical way, where I have a high view of humans are able to do great, profound, powerful things, but more often than not, almost all the time, actually, humans, once they accomplish something and they get notoriety for it and get influence and sway for it and fame, I have a very low view of any human's ability to withstand the evil, corrupting influences of those things that have been gained by virtue of doing a powerful, beautiful thing. And so this is the process of history, in my view, in which humans constantly are succumbing to things like greed, authoritarianism, to violence, to abuse, to oppression. I think that these things are not so easily eradicated from the human spirit. In fact, part of the reason I'm getting a little personal in my personal views here, but part of the reason I maintain a Christian faith is precisely that reason, is that I think that we need something decisively outside of us, transcendent, divine, non-human, to heal us of the spiritual maladies we can't heal ourselves of. So this is turning into almost a mini little sermonish rant. I don't mean it to be, but this was my genuine reaction to Soul Boom, was that I thought, wow, this guy really cares about this topic. I'm glad he's talking about spirituality. I think he's right that we need to talk about spirituality. I'm really glad that he's so conversant and respectful of great faith traditions through human history. I'm not sure that I can get over the threshold with him as to say we just need to be inspired to do it, to put it into action, because I think no matter what, humans are going to succumb to what Christians call sin, frankly. This is the classic doctrine of sin in Christian thought. And so I don't maintain an optimism there, and I maintain a firm kind of conviction that we need something outside of humanity writ large to save humanity. And so a spiritual revolution would be great. Especially, I'm all for a spiritual revolution that unleashes more forgiveness, unleashes more peace, unleashes more love, unleashes more self-giving service, unleashes more valuing up of the marginal and the other. I'm all for a spiritual revolution that really accomplishes that. And to the extent that Soul Boom maybe moves some people in that direction, I'm all for it. I'm, however, very wary of the idea that a spiritual revolution, the likes of which he is putting forward in these pages, is the fundamental knockdown thing that is going to save us. Because at the end of the day, it kind of seems like it's just a revolution that's going to come from us. And I think that's where I might part ways at the end of the day with the argument of Soul Boom. So, I don't mean that to be a, heavy-handed, dismissive critique of the book by any means. Hopefully you didn't get that from the way I just talked about it, because I actually really appreciated it for lots of the things that I discussed. But at the end of the day, I just maintain a fundamentally kind of different viewpoint. And in that sense, it's actually helpful and clarifying to read. And I would actually encourage anyone who's interested, I think I'll end by saying this, anyone who's interested in how to talk about matters of spirituality in our cultural climate today would really benefit a lot from reading Soul Boom, because there's a lot of really wonderful content there, and Rainn Wilson has done a great example. I think he's done a courageous, great example of putting out a explicit discussion of matters of spirituality and why they're so important, and kind of an apologetic for at least having this conversation of this realm and not just limiting ourselves to material causes, material policies, material outcomes. So I appreciated it for all of that. So, but at the end of the day, yeah, I think I maintain a pretty different fundamental view of what's possible, and what our future might look like, as a result. So those are my thoughts on Soul Boom. A little bit maybe of a more personal take than some of my other book reviews are, but I think that it merited it. And at the end of the day, I really appreciate Rainn Wilson's voice, and I'm glad that he is kind of waving the flag for matters of spiritual concern, given even my ways that I part ways with him at the end of the day. So I would encourage anyone if you've listened to this review and this has kind of struck your interests, I think you should grab a copy of Soul Boom, get it from your library, take a look at the case that Rainn Wilson is making, and use it to clarify your own views on where you stand on some of whether or not this is possible, or what this could look like in a matter of kind of practical import as we go forward as humans, because we do have a lot that needs to happen, and a spiritual revolution would really, in a genuine sense, be a very, very positive thing for the force of the world. But anyways, before I continue to ramble on this, those are my thoughts on Soul Boom. As always, thank you for taking some time to watch.